All right, we're on. This is confirmation class at St. Paul Lutheran Church, Rugby, on December 7th, 2023, Pearl Harbor Day. Day that will live in infamy after the dastardly attack of the Imperial Japanese on our naval base at Pearl Harbor. We are recording this for the benefit of those who cannot be with us today. And if this works, then I'll upload this to YouTube so that anyone who needs it can look it up. Now, due to a number of factors, Thanksgiving break, weather, and illness, I've had to cancel a few classes, which means we've gotten kind of far behind. So we're going to try our hardest to work our way through the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th commandments and the close of the commandments. The syllabus has us doing the creed today, but we'll just be doing well if we get through the commandments, and then we can do the whole first part of the creed starting next week. All right, does anybody remember what the 7th commandment is? That's right. Thou shalt not steal. What does stealing mean?
You should not take from your neighbors.
Yeah, so don't take something that belongs to someone else. I guess you could add without permission. So what do you call it when you take something that belongs to someone else with permission?
Borrowing.
Yeah, borrowing. Borrowing is okay. Stealing is not. So the straightforward way of stealing is actually like reaching out and snatching something that belongs to someone else. But there are other, more subtle ways of stealing. If you are an employee, you're working for someone, and you are lazy or sloppy, that's a form of stealing. Because in a way, you're stealing your wage from the employer, because the employer is paying you for the work you're doing. And if you're doing a shoddy job or aren't doing your job at all, in effect, you're stealing your wage from your employer. So work diligently and well when someone is paying you to do something. You can also steal by tricking someone or cheating someone. In ancient Israel, people would steal by hollowing out their weights. Because if you were going to get, say, a certain amount of food, you would tell how much food you were going to get for a certain amount of money by putting it in one side of the scale, and the other side of the scale would have a standard weight on it. But if you hollow out the weight, then it weighs less, which means you get less food to counterbalance it. So deceptively giving someone less than he's expecting, less than what his payment is worth, that would also be a form of stealing. So don't trick people, don't fool people, don't cheat people. Now, most of the commandments have not only a negative aspect, what you ought not to do, but also a positive aspect, what God commands us to do actively. And one thing God actively commands us to do is actually help our neighbor to keep his possessions. What if you find somebody's wallet lying in the street and it's full of cash? Yeah. That's right. Look at the ID. Find out who it is, where he lives, how you can get the wallet back to him. What you do not do is say, finders, keepers, losers, weepers. You ever heard that? You don't just say, oh, he lost it, I found it, so I get to keep it. Oh, yes, Holden.
What if it doesn't have an ID?
What might you do if there is no ID? No way to figure out who it belongs to.
Turn it in, maybe?
To whom?
Maybe the police.
Yeah, turn it into the police. That's what I would do. So, you don't keep your neighbor's stuff. If you find it, you do everything you can to return it to him. The catechism, if you have your printed catechism, it's on page 107. It also mentions a very subtle form of stealing that you may not always think about. Piracy. And when I talk about piracy, I don't mean you're on the high seas and you have a hook for your hand and a peg leg and an eye patch and say, all right, mateys, and that kind of thing. I mean illegally downloading content that doesn't belong to you, that you haven't paid for. I'm a fan of the original Star Wars movies. But it would be piracy for me to try to get versions of the Star Wars movies that I haven't paid for. However, because George Lucas has taken it upon himself to alter the original Star Wars trilogy almost beyond all recognition, and he's made it a horrible movie, I won't watch it that way. What I do enjoy watching is the despecialized edition, which is kind of shadily produced, but it's a restoration of the version of the movies as they were first released in theaters. But there's a statement before you download it that says, do not download this unless you already own a legal high-definition copy of the official Star Wars trilogy. So on the day that the original Star Wars trilogy was released on iTunes, I bought it. I bought all 3 movies, and they stink. They're awful. But I bought them, I own them, so then with a good conscience, I went and downloaded the despecialized edition. That's the only version of Star Wars that I'll watch. Yes, hold it. New Star Wars game came out? Oh, all right. I may have heard about that. What platforms is it on?
Xbox and PlayStation.
All right. All we have is a Nintendo Switch. Okay. Have to check that out. But if I find it, I won't illegally download it. I'll pay for it. Yes. Oh, yeah, I forgot. We were supposed to make sure we get all of our bathroom breaks out of the way. Does anybody need to go to the bathroom? All right, we're back. When we think about theft, think about stealing, what you're tempted to steal is what God has provided us to support this body in life. What things has God provided us, or through what has God provided for our needs of body and soul?
Everything.
Yeah, the creation, you could say. The bounty of the earth, the world around us, which produces crops and game for hunting, livestock, water and air. God also provides for us through vocations, through callings, like the calling to be parents. Your parents are a major factor in God providing for your needs. Also, the extensions of parental authority in government and education and church. And when you get old enough, your job, your career, your livelihood is how God provides for your needs. So you don't want to do anything that disrupts someone's access to those means of God providing for your needs of body and soul. Now, in this connection, I'm going to introduce an idea that doesn't seem like it has much to do with stealing, but it's a very important idea in the Christian church. It's the idea of what we call stewardship. Stewardship comes from the practice of a rich person who has a lot of property putting a skilled administrator in charge of his property. So if you have a mansion with lots of servants or employees who keep everything running, and you're really rich, you may not want to be consumed with the day-to-day nitty-gritties of running that mansion. So you might appoint someone to be in charge of running your mansion. That would be the steward. And his responsibility for coordinating all the employees and everything, that would be called stewardship. Jesus tells parables about stewards who have masters who entrust his property to them so that they can use that property for the benefit of their master. And there's one parable in particular called the parable of the dishonest manager or the shrewd steward. In this parable, the master gives charge of everything to his steward, but the steward doesn't use his master's goods well. He uses them for himself. He throws parties for himself. He uses his master's property to have a good time. And when his master finds out what his steward has been doing with his stuff, he says, "You're going to be fired." But he gives them notice, maybe a few weeks. And so when the steward realizes that everything's going to be taken away from him, he then stops using it to benefit himself, and he starts using it to benefit others, so that the others whom he benefits will remember him after he's fired and be good to him and help provide for him. And Jesus says that that's a good example. It's a good example because we ought to recognize that everything we have doesn't really belong to us. To whom does it belong? To God. God created it all, God gave it all, and when we die, God will take it all back. Have you heard the expression, "you can't take it with you"? What does that mean? You can't take it with you.
But you can't take your bed with you. And it's like your
Where?
heaven.
To heaven, yeah. When you die.
Take anything with you.
Yeah, you can't take anything with you beyond the grave. All of your,
I have a question.
Yep.
So in heaven, do you still have your parents?
if your parents are believers, yes.
Do you still know, your parents aren't married, but you still think of them, you know they're your parents?
Yes.
Oh.
Yep. We will still recognize those relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like at the transfiguration of Jesus, when he shone with light on the holy mountain, Moses and Elijah appeared alongside him, and they were recognizable as Moses and Elijah. They still had their same office. Moses was still the one who gave the law on Mount Sinai. Elijah was still the prophet of Israel, even though they were in heaven. So, yeah, when we die, our spirits will remain who we are with all of our relationships. You will, for all eternity, still be your parent's child.
And we'll know everybody that we know down here.
Yep. Yes, Holden.
What do you wear in heaven?
Well, the Revelation of St. John in chapter 7 describes the saints in heaven as wearing white robes. I don't know for sure how literally we're supposed to take that. He is talking about people who are dead. So it's before the resurrection on the last day. So it's people who are in heaven as spirits. They're wearing white robes. What will we wear when we're raised from the dead? I truly have no idea. I kind of suspect that we'll be dressed the same way we would have been dressed in whatever age we lived, except that I really like 18th century clothing, so maybe I would get to wear 18th century clothing when I'm in heaven, but who knows? I'm sure we'll wear something, though. I don't think we'll go back to the nakedness of the garden when we're in heaven. So you can't take it with you. When you die, you have to leave everything behind, all of your property, which means it's really silly to put your main focus on your property because it's all going to go away. You're going to lose it all. You can save all your life. You can make a huge fortune, and it won't make any difference for you after you die. It's gone. So it is wise to treat everything we have as if we're not going to have it forever. Recognize that it all really belongs to God and treat it accordingly. That's what we mean when we talk in church about being good stewards. It means using wisely and well the things that God has given us, like the time we have on earth. We should use our time wisely. Let's not fritter away the time we have in vain pursuits that don't benefit anyone. Certainly not spending it in sin. The money we have, we should use, yes, to provide for ourselves and those under our care, but also to be generous to our neighbors in need and support the work of the church. So, usually when we talk about stewardship in the Christian church, our main emphasis is on giving a portion of what God gives to us back to Him. In ancient Israel, the Israelites were commanded by God to give 1/10 of all they received back to God. So if they had flocks that gave birth to 100 lambs, then they would give 10 lambs to God. They would sacrifice those lambs, and the priests would get to eat a lot of the meat from those lambs. Or if they had 100 bushels of wheat produced in that year's harvest, they would give 10 bushels of wheat to the temple. So you give 1/10 of what God gives to you. These days, what that usually means is our money. How much money has God given us this year? Whether through selling things or through being paid by an employer. My recommendation is, if the Israelites were commanded to give 10% of what they received, and they had to under the law, well, we're under the gospel, and we should gladly give at least that much. We certainly shouldn't want to give less than they gave. So my recommendation is that you give 10% of your income to your church. That is a divine command. We're not told how much to give, but we are told in the New Testament to give in order to provide for the ministry of the word in our midst. So if nobody gave anything at any of our churches here, we wouldn't be able to maintain our buildings, and we wouldn't be able to pay your pastor. So then I would have to work at, I always used to say I work at McDonald's, but there isn't a McDonald's around here. I work at Subway. I'd have to work at Subway or Dairy Queen or something to make ends meet, which means I wouldn't have the time to study God's Word and visit shut-ins and have funerals and prepare sermons and so on. My ministry would be very limited if I had to provide for my family in other ways. So it is the duty of Christians to provide for the ministry of the Word in their midst by giving generously from what God has first given to them. And the good rule of thumb is try to give 10% of what God gives you. If you make $100,000 a year, give $10,000 that year to your church for the upkeep of the ministry of the Word. If you only make $100 for the year, give $10 to your church, and so on. All right. Any questions about stewardship? Any questions about stealing? All right. We'll move on to the 8th commandment. Does anybody remember what the 8th commandment is?
You should not give false testimony against your neighbor.
Very good reading. Yes, no false testimony against your neighbor, or the old way of saying it, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. And what that literally means is, don't lie about someone else in court in order to get him in trouble. In the ancient world, getting in trouble would usually mean be killed, be executed. These days, it might mean you lose your job, or you go to prison, or you're fined, or something like that. We don't want to do that. Don't lie about someone to get them in trouble in court. However, there are many more ways than that to apply this commandment. At this point, I'm going to go in a little aside and point out an interesting way to think of the commandments. You can think of each of the commandments not only as forbidding or commanding something, but also as protecting something. So the first commandment, anybody remember the first commandment?
You shall not have no other gods before me.
Yep, no other gods. Very good. So you could say the first commandment protects God's honor as the only God. Second commandment, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord in vain. So you could say then the second commandment protects God's name, the holiness of his name. And in the third commandment, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Yep. So the way we keep the Sabbath day holy is by worshiping God, hearing his word and learning it. So you could say the third commandment protects the worship of God. Now it gets easier when we get into the second table of the law concerning how we love our neighbors. The fourth commandment is honor thy father and thy mother, that it may be well with thee and thou mayest live long on the earth. And of course, we understand the command to honor father and mother as applying also to other authorities like our government or our schools or our churches and those who are in charge in those institutions. So you could say the fourth commandment protects authority. If there were no authority, we would live in anarchy, which would lead to tyranny. But thankfully, God has given us authority to maintain good order and peace. And it is important that that authority be protected, which is the function of the fourth commandment. Fifth commandment, thou shalt not kill. So what is protected by forbidding murder? You're protected from death, which means we're protecting your life.
In Matthew chapter 5, it says that, and I think it's like verse 22. It's like, like it's just like something about murdering, but then like also about going about other people behind other people's back and like gossiping, and it's like the way that kind of made it sound was all the commandments are the same thing, like murdering, but then also going behind somebody's back and talking is like the same thing and the same type of sin. Like even though they think that murder's worse, but it's like you're still sinning.
Right. Jesus forbids even the desire to hurt someone. So it's not enough that you never shot the guy. You shouldn't even want to harm him.
So there's like this Bible class that some like younger couple put it on in Towner, and we do it every Wednesday, and they have like, so they went over that yesterday, and it was like that like you're practically, in a way they put it in this way, it's kind of like harsh, but it was like you go behind somebody's back is you practically shooting them in a way. You know, they kind of put it that way and like to really make it stand out. Like,
yeah. Let's hold that thought, because that's a really important way to think about this. The fifth commandment protects your life. The sixth commandment protects marriage. Couples and their children benefit from marriage being upheld. The seventh commandment protects your stuff, your property. And then the eighth commandment, against bearing false witness against your neighbor, the eighth commandment protects your reputation, your good name. And the fact is, if you lose your reputation, if you lose your good name, you lose a lot along with it. Because if you lose your reputation, nobody wants to hire you. Nobody wants to be friends with you. Nobody wants anything to do with you. And you're really going to suffer as a result. You may lose your livelihood. And in that vein, I want to bring up an idea that you may have heard of called cancel culture. Have you all heard of cancel culture? Some have, some haven't. Cancel culture is the idea that if you do anything that is not politically correct, So, like, if you say something that somebody thinks is racist or sexist or homophobic or whatever, then they'll post all over on social media about how this guy's racist, this guy's a homophobe, this guy's, whatever you want to say. And you'll get a lot of pressure from your whole society to apologize. And then once you apologize, that's like an admission of guilt. So then they say, this is an evil racist, nobody should have anything to do with him. And then you lose your job.
But why don't you apologize if you're right?
Because you're scared. A lot of people apologize because they're scared of the mob. You're actually better off not apologizing. If somebody accuses you of something in public and tries to get people to think you're racist, just ignore it as much as you can. Don't apologize for it, because apologizing only makes it worse. Now, if you've actually done something wrong, you should apologize to the person you've harmed. But usually the point of cancel culture is you didn't actually do anything wrong. You just did something that said something that somebody thinks is politically incorrect, and they're going to destroy your life over it. Are you all familiar with Harry Potter? Maybe a little bit? No, not some yes, some no. Okay. Harry Potter was written by J.K. Rowling. J.K. Rowling is not a conservative woman. She's a very liberal woman. She's not a traditional Christian. She is a Christian. She's not a traditional Christian. She wrote these books and became a multi-billionaire. But then she started getting involved in the whole transgender controversy because she is a liberal. She's also a feminist. And as a feminist, she doesn't like men pretending to be women and invading women's spaces and dominating women's sports and things like that. So J.K. Rowling, the author of Harry Potter, has been very vocal on particularly Twitter, speaking out against the transgenderism madness. And as a result, cancel culture has come out swinging against J.K. Rowling. None of the actors from the Harry Potter movies will have anything to do with J.K. Rowling anymore because they say she's transphobic and she's participating in transgenocide and all this stuff. Nobody wants to publish her books. Nobody wants to have her involved in stories anymore.
Just because she's doing the right thing?
Yes. Yep. So what they're doing is trying to destroy her life, which is kind of hard to do when she's a multi-billionaire. But they're doing their best to destroy her life. And they're doing it by gunning for her reputation, which is breaking the 8th commandment. That's what the 8th commandment is for, to protect your reputation, to protect your good name. So, strictly speaking, you break the 8th commandment by lying about someone in court to get him in trouble. But there are a lot more ways than that to harm someone's reputation. You can actually say true things about someone and thus get him in trouble. If someone does something bad or shameful, but he's not hurting anyone, no one is in danger as a result, and you find out about it, and you take it upon yourself to go to the newspaper and say, my neighbor is doing this or that, it's a shameful thing. All right, it may be perfectly true, but whom does it benefit that now the whole community knows what your neighbor's doing? It doesn't benefit anyone. Maybe it benefits you because now others can say, oh, yeah, give us the scoop on your neighbor so-and-so. And then it become popular for a few days. But ultimately it just harms, just does damage. Doesn't do anyone any good. Sometimes telling the truth can be a form of breaking the 8th commandment. You don't always have to say everything just because it's true. Now, you shouldn't lie, but if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. Who said that? If you ain't got nothing nice to say, don't say nothing at all. Thumper. Anybody see Bambi? Y'all still watch Disney movies at all? Bambi about the deer? All right. Your assignment is go watch Bambi tonight on Disney Plus.
I watched it last year.
Really? Okay.
Is that the one where we're trying to find the deer?
Actually, you know what? Scratch that. Don't go watch Bambi because it's anti-hunter. It makes hunters look bad. Go watch Godzilla versus Bambi,
I've heard of that one.
which you can find on YouTube. Oh, yeah? Okay. I still need to see those. So, when we make public our neighbor's private faults or secrets, we are breaking the 8th commandment. If we spread rumors about someone else, if we talk about someone behind his back, we're harming his reputation, which is, you could say, yes, a form of murder, because it affects his livelihood, his ability to provide for himself in our society. And really, that goes to show all the commandments are intertwined. They all relate to one another, because after all the commandments ultimately have to do with love for God and love for our neighbor. If you fail in love, then you're going to break all the commandments one way or another. Now, if we break the 8th commandment by talking about our neighbor behind his back, spreading rumors, trying to get someone in trouble, trying to harm someone's reputation, then we keep the 8th commandment by speaking well of other people, by building people up. What do you want your speech to do? Do you want it to tear people down and harm people in the eyes of others? Or do you want your speech to build people up and help people to love and respect one another more? I think it's kind of nice if the world is a better place because of the way I talk. And that's something we should all aspire to. Draw attention to the good in your neighbor. Instead of talking about the bad stuff your neighbor does, talk about the good stuff your neighbor does. Try to help him be seen in a better light by others. And in the new translation of the Catechism, we say, explain everything in the kindest way. The old way of saying that is, put the best construction on everything. And I'd like us to be familiar with that language. Put the best construction on everything. That means, let's say something has happened, and there are 2 probable explanations for that. One explanation looks really bad. The other explanation is pretty reasonable. All right, let's go with the explanation that sounds pretty reasonable, instead of the explanation that looks really bad and makes somebody look bad in the eyes of others. Put the best construction on everything. Interpret things generously. Explain things in the kindest way that you reasonably can. So one of the points that I really want to bring out is that just because something is true doesn't mean you have to say it. Only say it if it is of benefit to other people. Now, if someone is doing something that's going to harm someone, yeah, you need to talk about it. But the way to talk about it is go to the proper authorities. Talk to someone who can do something about it. Don't just spread rumors about someone behind his back. All right, any questions about the 8th commandment? I will say that school is one of the worst places for the 8th commandment, because when you're in school, it's very tempting to score points with your classmates by making fun of someone else and tearing someone down.
It's not breaking it though if you're spreading good rumors about the person, right?
Right. Okay. If you're trying to help people think better of someone, that's keeping the 8th commandment. Now, I should also point out, if you are really bothered by something that someone else is doing, even if it's not hurting anyone, it's okay if you need to talk to someone else about it. But let that be a private conversation just to help you work through things. If you talk to your pastor about things that you're suffering at the hands of other people, that's okay. You have permission to do that. Just don't then go and try and turn everyone in the community against the person that's hurting you. All right, 9th and 10th commandments we consider together because they both have to do with coveting. What do you think that word covet means? Yes, Holden.
Want your neighbor's things.
Yes. Yep. In fact, I'm gonna cut out that needing part because it doesn't make any difference if you need it. If it's your neighbor's, if it properly belongs to him, it's off limits to you. Now, it's okay to have a desire for something that isn't yours. Like, for instance, if you go to the store and see something on the shelf that would be really nice to have, it's not coveting for you to want that thing. Now, it might get to be coveting if you start obsessing over that thing, and you can't think about anything else. It's all that matters to you. But just to want something doesn't necessarily become coveting. I've got plenty of stuff on my Amazon wish list. I've got like 100 books on my Amazon wish list. I would like to have every one of those books. That doesn't mean I'm coveting them. However, if I see that you have a book in your possession, maybe it's an antique first edition of a book I really like, so it's a really unique piece, and it's really important to you, and I want it, and I can't stop thinking about it, and I start plotting and planning some way that I can get that first edition book from your bookcase. That's coveting. In the commandments, we single out coveting our neighbor's spouse. That's a good thing to think about, because your spouse truly does belong to you and not to anyone else. It is a gross sin to desire someone else's spouse.
Also, it was like in Matthew chapter 5, it also said about the, what was it? It was about,
If you have looked at a woman to lust after her, you have committed adultery with her in your heart.
yeah, and then it's, yeah.
Now, that's a really important point, because what the 9th and 10th commandments reveal to us is that it's not just sinful actions that the commandments forbid. It's sinful desires that the commandments forbid.
It also said like that, so say the husband is cheating on the wife with another person they're married, and then like it's like the husband's, obviously it's not good to get divorced, but then the husband's demanding like more of something than the wife.
Yeah.
The wife is able to marry him again.
Yes.
It's still not good, but then if the husband, it's not good.
Yeah, and that reminds me. When we talked about the 6th commandment, at this point 3 weeks ago, we never talked about divorce. And that's a really important thing to talk about. Divorce is not permitted for a Christian under normal circumstances, because when you marry, you are marrying for life. You are pledging yourself until you die to your spouse, to be faithful to your spouse. However, Jesus in the Gospels makes an exception for when your spouse has been unfaithful to you, has cheated on you. If your spouse cheats on you, then you are permitted by Jesus to divorce that spouse and remarry if you wish. You don't have to divorce. In the best case scenario, you would be reconciled with your spouse, you would forgive your spouse, and the marriage would continue. But you don't have to do that. I mean, you have to forgive from the heart, but you don't have to remain in the marriage if your spouse commits adultery. So it is permitted to divorce if your spouse cheats on you. St. Paul adds that if your spouse leaves you, if your spouse forsakes you, you are not bound to that spouse. That is, you're free to remarry. And that's because in both cases, it's not you who really ended the marriage. It's your spouse who ended the marriage. Your spouse ended the marriage by having relations with someone outside the marriage. Your spouse ended the marriage by leaving. So if your spouse ends the marriage, you have the right under God to seek a legal divorce, which is a public recognition under the law that the marriage has ended. So I will also add, the Catechism explanation includes physical abuse as a form of deserting your spouse. Because if you think about it, if a man is beating his wife, that means she's in bodily danger. And if they have kids, their kids are in bodily danger too. Have a good evening, Luke. That means the wife, for her and her children's safety, has to get away from that man. And that means even though the man says, "Oh, I love you, babe, I'll never do it again, babe," that's what they always say. Because of the relationship of abuse and the endangerment that he is putting his family through, he has necessitated their leaving, which means he bears responsibility for the breakup of the marriage. There are pastors who disagree with me on this. But if I have a member whose spouse is endangering him, then I'm going to counsel that member. It is permissible under God to seek a divorce from this harmful and dangerous spouse.
Have you ever had to do that?
Yes. And one thing that's really bothered me is there was one case in particular that's just like you read about. The guy was so abusive to his wife. She finally left. She finally got a divorce. And then she went back to him. And he continued beating her. I pray, God, that you never end up in an abusive relationship like that. But if you do, I want you to know it's okay to leave. And there are resources to keep you safe and provide for you if you need to leave. Don't let a wicked man, it's less common for women to do that, but it happens actually among women too. Other than that, don't get a divorce just because you don't love each other anymore.
Well, it's like, you're going to marry somebody, and obviously, you don't always see it coming, obviously, but then, you don't just marry the man,
Right. You don't stay married because you're in love. You cultivate love because you're married, because you're committed to this person for life. And the fact is, it's very rare for that euphoria that you get when you're young and in love to continue like that forever. It comes back periodically in your marriage, if it's a normal marriage. But you can't run a marriage on that. And I'll tell you, if I always felt the way I felt when I was first falling in love with my wife, I wouldn't be able to get anything done. I think it's a form of insanity. And I love my wife. I like being around her. And every now and then I get that euphoria back. But that's not what our marriage is based on. Our marriage is based on the fact that we made a vow to each other. We promised each other we're going to stick with each other till we die. So just because you fight from time to time, and I don't mean like physically beating, I mean, argue. Just because you have trouble getting along, just because that spark isn't there like it used to be, that is not a reason to get a divorce. Work on the marriage.
Because there's always that times where you're going to disagree.
Yep.
Because you don't agree with everybody, even if it's...
Yeah. Now, I've known couples that have been married for like 70 years and more who say, we never fought a day in our lives. I think, I'll believe them, but that's very, very rare.
Actually, my grandma and grandpa, obviously they argued before, but even my mom said she's never been around them when they've argued. And
that's...
And obviously, they disagree, but it's, because they're not perfect and there's going to be times, but even I've never been around them and they've actually disagreed.
That's good parenting. It's inevitable that spouses will disagree, but that's not for your kids. Your kids don't need to be seeing you fighting at each other's throats. Kids need to know that their parents are in it for life.
Which
yes.
I've never seen my parents on YouTube.
My grandparents are actually 50 years anniversary. I don't know, it was a month ago.
Okay. Man, 50 years.
Yeah.
All right. Do they ever fight? Don't know. Probably not.
Yeah, I think my grandma like 57, it's like how do we get each other?
Yeah, so I do want it to be really clear. Divorce is not an option for Christians. Sometimes divorce is forced upon you if your spouse cheats on you, if your spouse leaves you. And I would consider abuse a form of leaving. But divorce is not a solution to your marital problems. We don't seek divorce. Okay, so the commandments against coveting make it clear to us that it's not just the action, it's the desire that God forbids. And that's an important Lutheran idea, that even our sinful desires, even our sinful thoughts, are themselves sin, and they involve guilt before God. And we need forgiveness for our sinful thoughts. The time to resist sin is not when you're about to do it. The time to resist sin is when the thought or the desire first enters your head. Martin Luther said that I can't keep the birds from flying over my head, but I can keep them from building a nest in my hair. If you think about that, I'm an ornithophobe. I'm terrified of birds. I hate birds. So I like thinking of birds as a metaphor for sin. Right? So birds fly over me all the time. I can't do anything about that. But if a bird were to come and sit on my head and start making a nest out of my hair, yeah, I'd be able to drive that bird away and get to safety. If you think of sin in that way, all right, you're not going to be able to keep the sinful thoughts from flitting around in your head. They're going to be there. But chase them out. Shoo them away. And don't entertain them. Don't give them room in your head and your heart. Don't daydream about sinning. Stop it when it first comes into your head.
There was a time, so in our duck shed, like in the summer, there's lots of waterfalls go in there, so like they fly at your head and come in. And I told my sister, so I was supposed to feed the ducks that day, but I didn't want to because I knew they were going to fly right at my head. And Ellen went in there, and she got pooped on.
Oh, no.
And she came out, and she was just so mad at me. And I was like, it's not my fault you went in there.
Yeah.
You told me you wanted me to go in there.
Oh. Well, the close of the commandments, I think we're going to have to save for next week. We'll talk about God's punishment for sin and God's blessings for obedience. For now, you've got your memory assignment for next week. And for those, for Nathan, the assignment is simply the second article of the Creed concerning Jesus. So let's close with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. All right. Thank you, everyone.